Hello everyone and welcome back to the first leg of the FIDE Grand Prix 2022, the series of tournaments that will decide the final two challengers for the next candidates tournament. It's Levon Aronian versus Vidit, and it's quite an enjoyable game featuring another one of your favorite openings. Of course, that is the Nimzo Indian defense. We've seen quite a lot of it in the Tata Steel that just ended. We've seen the early A3 line, which just completely destroyed Black. It's considered a lesser move, but Black didn't really figure how to play against it. It was not used for some time. But here Levon will stick to the traditional one, and it's just going to be a very interesting game. So let's dive straight into it. We have D4 by Levon, Knight to F6 by Vidit, C4 E6. Now comes Knight to C3 and Bishop to B4. The Nimzo Indian is on the board, and now in the Tata Steel we've seen a lot of A3s, but here just a normal E3. We have castles by Vidit, and now Bishop to D3, the so-called Bishop's attack against the Nimzo Indian. We have D5 striking in the center, and now usually White just continues developing with something like Knight to F3 or even the early A3. But here Levon first trades in the center, C captures, E captures, and now plays A3. And this is somewhat rarer. Bishop back to D6, so in this line the dark square bishop survives, and now Queen to C2. Putting pressure on that h7 pawn, so at some point Vidit might play h6, but that's also weakening the position. If you don't have to play it, maybe you don't want to play it. So c6, adding another defender here, and now comes Knight G to e2. There are some games where Knight to f3 was played, but Knight G to e2 is a new move, so already as of move 9 we have a completely new game. Vidit continues developing, rook to e8 and the bishop to d2. We have b6 and Levon castles here. We have bishop to a6, ready to trade off White's very strong light square bishop, and here Levon just plays king to h1. Also interesting is just capturing on a6. This can be played, but king h1 was played because you constantly have to worry about ideas like this, and knight to g4 check. And now, okay, in this line it doesn't work because White can play king to g3, and let's say queen g5, there's f4, and the Black queen cannot remain on the g file, so this would be just silly for Black. But it's always useful to avoid such trickery, so king h1 first, and now c5. Vidit strikes in the center. We have rook 8 to d1 and now g6. Now you don't have to worry about the h7 pawn, and also the knight on f6 can move. And here Levon plays queen to b1. I guess it can be considered a multi-purpose move, as the bishop can now be retreated to c2, but also you're just preparing this b4 push. And now Vidit isn't as convinced of capturing on d3, because as g6 has been played, the queen-bishop battery on this diagonal isn't all that impressive. So Vidit just brings the bishop back. Of course, you want it on this long diagonal. And now knight to f4. An excellent square for the knight, putting a lot of pressure on that d5 pawn. And if bishop captures on f4, we're just gonna capture, and it seems like you can win a pawn here, but after knight e2 it's not all that much for Black. You're gonna win back the pawn here. The double pawns are very weak here, not much to look forward to. So instead, just knight b to d7. Vidit continues developing, and now f3. We are considering e4 at some point, grabbing more space in the center. Knight to f8, shifting the knight over to e6 to challenge the knight this way, and now finally b4. We have c captures on d4. You have to do something because the pawn is, attacked many times. C captures, we have e captures, and only now bishop captures on f4. And this is a very interesting capture. You should... we often say that you shouldn't really capture something just for the sake of capture, so maybe developing is a better way to go. But here Vidit has a clear plan of what he wants to do, so he gives up the bishop pair, but he will also win back White's bishop pair. Bishop captures on f4, and now knight to h5. And you can't really just move the bishop back. For example, bishop d2, we're going to play queen h4, and now you are in some trouble here. Okay, it's not lost yet. You can play king to g1, but it's not very comfortable. So instead, bishop to e5, and now Vidit plays f6 and forces White to retreat to g3, where he will capture the bishop. So bishop g3, knight captures, h captures. And what Vidit did here is that he traded down into this position where Black has a messed up king structure and also a doubled g pawn. So queen to c7, putting pressure on that weakness, and now knight to e2. Levon has to defend this, and rook to e3. A very nice rook lift. It's on a dark square. You you can't reach it with the bishop. With the knight for the moment, that rook is the remain there, and the other rook is coming to e8. So queen to a2, very nice, as well, you're expecting rook to e8, so you want to have this knight sufficiently defended, and also this might be an issue for black at some point. So here, rook 8 to e8, and now queen to d2. Putting pressure on this rook. So queen to d6. Okay, the rook is defended, but you know, that can change very easily. We have queen to d6, and now comes rook to c1. Grabbing hold of the open c file, we have rook 3 back to e7, and now bishop to b5, attacking the rook on e8. We have rook to c8, now offering a rook trade, and Levon trades here. We have rook captures, bishop captures, and now queen to f4, offering a queen trade. And what do you do here? Now, basically, your options are queen to e6 and queen captures on f4. And now, your opponent has a messed up pawn structure, so you definitely don't mind trading queens. But on the other hand, queen to e6 also has its merits. All depends on how do you evaluate the position. Vidit decides that maybe it's better to trade off the queens. So knight captures on e4 and the bishop to b7 now, defending this pawn here. So if you look at the position now, the bishop on b7 is stuck guarding the d5 pawn, but the light square bishop, even though it can move around freely, it doesn't really have any targets. This pawn is nicely defended. You're not in time to attack it. Black will be able to defend it sufficiently, and well, like I said, there just aren't all that many targets. So here, players just do what you have to do when you enter the endgame. They start improving the position of their kings. King to g1, king to f7, king to f2, and now knight to e6, offering a knight trade. But this also means that now Vidit left his king side unattended. So here, rook to h1. Going after that h7 pawn, so h5, and now bishop back to d3, putting pressure on the g6 pawn. Levon says, all right, I don't mind if you capture here, I'm just gonna promote my doubled g pawn into a doubled f pawn. So here, knight captures on f4, g captures on f4, and now rook to c7. And this rook to c7 is a problem move for Vidit. He was very much low on the clock here, and here you have to play something else. But he played rook to c7, so feel free to pause the video here and try to figure out how to take advantage of this and win the game for Levon while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on cracking this endgame. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, the move is not g4. The move is actually f5. So congratulations to everyone who found f5. Hence, not rook to c7. Maybe f5 from Vidit would have been better here. But for those of you who consider the g4 because you saw, okay, h captures g, rook h7 check picks up the rook, there's a problem. Rook to c3. And now it's, well, not all that great. King e2, we defend our bishop. Bishop to c8 now, and after g captures, and captures, we capture on a3. White rook captures on d5. We're gonna play rook a2 check, and after king e3, rook a3, with some ideas of maybe bishop to a6 if the rook moves the 5th rank. But as long as the rook is on the 5th rank, if bishop a6, just b5, this is perfectly fine. Okay, after this rook to c7, like we said, f5 was played. Once again, congratulations to everyone who decided for this move, because now there's no way to prevent material loss. Here, Vidit tried g5, but just to show you what happens if captures, we're going to capture with the rook. Now this pawn is attacked twice, and if you try king to g6 to attack the rook and defend the pawn, then g4, and that's it. The f pawn is pinned, there's no playing this. If bishop c8, we just go into this endgame. Bishop captures, rook captures, now this pawn will fall too. And yes, okay, black has some counterplay with rook to c3, king g3, rook captures on a3, rook captures here, but now you have a passed d pawn, and also you will create a passed pawn on the king side. Black will not be able to fend off the two weaknesses. So after f5, Vidit tried g5. Okay, at least he will keep his pawn structure intact for the price of a pawn. Rook captures on h5, and now king to g7. We have rook back to h1 by Levon, and now rook to c3. We have king to e2, and now, okay, if you capture on a3, which you can, then rook to c1 is very ugly. There's just no good way to handle this. For example, if bishop a6, you offer a trade, rook c7 check, we deliver one check, and after the king moves, just b5, for example, traps the bishop, but any other line is terrible for black. So here, bishop to c6 first by Vidit. Now comes rook to a1. Levon defends his pawn, although even b5 and a4 was okay. Bishop to d7, and now king to d2. Now the rook is forced away from the third rank. Rook to c8, and now b5. Grabbing more space on the queen side. Rook to h8, but it's not a problem, just g4. The rook really has nothing to do here on these files. So rook back to c8, and now we have a4. So okay, you've grabbed a lot of space here, you've improved your position, but how do you actually go from this to winning this position? You're only up one pawn, and it's a doubled f pawn. Well, king to f8, now comes a5. Now we trade off here, and we activate our rook. That's how we do it. So king e7, a captures, and rook to a7. We have rook to b8, making sure that no harm can come to this b6 pawn. Now king e3. We have king to d6, and now Levon strikes with f4. So this is now creating a second weakness. Rook to e8, check, king to f3, g captures on f4, king captures on f4. And now the thing is, the position is very passive for black. For example, if rook to b8, you don't want to allow some like rook b7. We're just going to improve our position as much as possible before we play g5. For example, rook a6 puts constant pressure on this pawn. At some point, we play g5 once our position is as good as it can be, and then we just win the game. So here, Vidit saw that passive play is not the way to play this. He tried one last trump card, and this is, well, it's not really a trump card, but it's a very good idea, and it really shows you how you always have to look for that little something, no matter how bleak the position seems. Bishop captures on b5. He gives up the bishop captures here, and now rook to e4 check, seemingly going for the d4 pawn, but after king f3, rook f4 check. Vidit offers a rook here, and of course the rook cannot be accepted, as the black king would now be in stalemate. So that's the trick here. So Levon has to figure out how to avoid the checks, otherwise he just stalemates black, and it's a draw. So king e3, Vidit continues, rook e4 check. King f2, we have rook to f4 check, and now king to e1. And now after check, we can block with bishop to e2. So here Vidit captures the pawn. We have rook to a4. You can't allow these two pawns to disappear off the board, otherwise it's going to be a draw. So not much to do here. Rook captures on a4 was played. Bishop captures, now king e5, hoping to eliminate these pawns. So king d2, king f4, and now of course bishop to d1. We will not allow it. d4, now comes king to d3, attacking the pawn. King e5, we have defending the pawn. King c4, and now king to e4. Bishop c2 check, king to e3, and bishop to b1. And with this bishop to b1 move, it was on move 64 that Vidit resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. But it's a beautiful continuation, and for those of you who are maybe new to chess would be like, yes, but how do you actually win this? Well, it's also very enjoyable. For example, if black tries b5, and there's really not all that much to try. b5 check, king here, d3. Yes, white will also have to give up the bishop, but after captures, there's g5. F captures on g5, f6, g4, f7, g3, and now white gets a queen into the game, and that's just it. You are not in time. If g2, a simple queen f2 can pick up the pawn. If the black king was closer, then yes, it would be dangerous. For example, if the black king was one square closer to the pawn, but we know that even here it would still be winning, because you guys, by studying the endgame so vigorously, know that if the pawn is here, or here, then it's a draw, and of course if the pawn is here, or here, then it's a win. But yeah, I don't have to tell that to you guys. So yeah, after bishop to b1, Vidit resigned, and a wonderful start to the Grand Prix for Levon Aronian, who is one step closer to qualifying for the FIDE Candidates Tournament in the next cycle. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Always fight until the very end, like Vidit did here, because you never know when it could work. I would like to wish a very happy birthday to Rohan Chowdhury, and I would like to thank Mr. Hoodie Guy, Mr. Hoodie Guy, Mr. Hoodie Guy, and Mr. Hoodie Guy for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the FIDE Grand Prix until it ends. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.